Well, when we first met, you and Paul paid me a visit at the studio that I shared with Terry Swack at the time. And I seem to remember it didn't take long for you and Terry to engage in a pretty lively discussion of your work. And while Paul and I sat back and witnessed it. What do you remember about that?
Well, it was great first meeting Clif, because what happened was, again, we didn't know a soul. We didn't know a single person in Boston. So it was me and Paul and his, at that time, fiance, Carolyn, who had moved here the same time we did. And no clients, no contacts, no nothing. So we kind of, there was a guy who taught at school. We became friends with this guy, Ed McDonald, who went to Cranbrook with Scott Nash, who ran the firm Corey McPherson Nash, still around. So Scott was kind enough to kind of go through his Rolodex and point out, like, here's a good typesetter back in those days, and a printer and illustrator, Holly Becker, you'll see her later. He said, you should check out this guy, Clif. He's doing really cool stuff. I'm like, great. At that time, now you have to think back to way back then. You couldn't just go online and say, what's his work like? You had to go there. And so we made an appointment. We came by the studio, and we kind of showed Clif our portfolio, and looked at his work. It was really cool, and we're really interested in the stuff that the AIGA was doing at the time. We thought, here's this kind of traditionally conservative city, especially design-wise, but here are these great people being brought, the New Directions lecture series and things like that. So anyway, we're going through the portfolio, and Terry Swack, who shared studio space with Clif, we didn't know who she was, and suddenly she comes in a big huff, like, goes through our portfolio and says, "You guys have a distinct style. You got to do that to make a living in design," and blah. And I'm like, wait a minute, like. So if you saw the Frank Lloyd Wright poster and the trophy and the Paint the Big Apple Red poster, you'd definitely say that's the same person. It's like we tried to kind of have the design, reflective of whatever the assignment is. You say, oh no, it's definitely the same style. You gotta, keep that, have the same style. And I'm like, I hate that same style thing. That's like being in jail. Like you have to do the same thing over and over. Like, no, you have to have a style. So we're getting this heated argument. I don't even know who this woman is. And Clif and Paul are kind of like trying to calm us down. So later, Terry, of course, became AIGA president. Clif and I were the kind of lecture committee heads, but it kind of was the introduction to the AIGA in Boston. And I think the AIGA has been something that it continues to be, which is anything you want it to be. So basically, being on the lecture committee, we'd say, hey, I'm interested in X, and the president would say, cool, I'm sure there's enough other people to fill a room, make it happen. And I think that's a great thing about the AIGA Boston. So I really encourage people to get involved. And these are just some things I've done over the years. So this was way back when Clif and I were still on the lecture committee chairs, and they had this format. So this is Art Chantry, who's kind of known for his really low budget work. And so I just held up these signs in a photo booth, and kind of they'd randomly appear and just printed it really big. Or Malcolm Garrett, whose studio was called Assorted Images. I didn't really care for his assortment of images, so I substituted my assortment of images.
That's on film.
Yeah, that's on film. Or Chip Kidd, before he was Chip Kidd. I should have the back of this one, but the back was printed with all the information, but the label went right over it, so you couldn't really read the text. The Sea Party was kind of fun, where we had a thing back at Avalon. Anyone remember that? That's where the new Hard Rock.
Before that.
Yeah, and that's where the new Hard Rock Cafe is. But anyway, like, you're supposed to bring like a piece of your work, like that you liked, and stick it to the wall with your picture. And it was a great way to kind of associate people's work with their faces, and so pin up. And this was a Kent Dayton photo. It'll come up later. And this was another thing Clif and I did together for the Maculas. This was P. Scott Macula before he tragically died much too young. So I did this version of his. He was kind of bad boy of computers, so I kind of did this really, these bad scanned letters on a scanner and stuff like that. And then 2003 Bone Show, Call for Entries poster. These were all die-cut bones, and it just seemed so obvious to use the operation game. And then each one of these bones had a different little label, like the share had this removed bone, or the this is another one.
Make the logo bigger bone.
That kind of stuff. So anyway, but meeting Clif and arguing with Terry was kind of my introduction to the world of AIGA Boston. So.
I seem to remember there were stories about you and Nancy Skolas too, but we won't go into that. Let's see.
No fair there.